One thing that I think tends to happen, I think that we as a church hopefully have been broken of it, is we exalt those that know the Greek, know the Hebrew, know the textual lineage, and all of a sudden give them more credence than whatever. And this is really a simple issue. Through this, I'm not going to claim to be a textual expert. I'm not going to claim to be an expert in Greek or Hebrew or anything of that nature. Here is the question we need to answer. Do you have a perfect Bible in your hands? That's the question that must be answered. And it's a simple yes or no. Either you have the Bible in your hand that's perfect, or you don't. If it's not, then read any version. Nothing matters. But if it's not, then also at the same time, a lot of what we believe crumbles. The question becomes, do we have a perfect Bible? And if we do, where is it? Is there a possibility that there were corrupt manuscripts early on? Is it possible that there's counterfeit and corrupt versions now? And the answer to those questions for me is yes. The answer to the first question is, do we have a perfect Bible, is yes. And because of that yes, then there are consequences or things that we should then assume. If I believe I have a perfect Bible in the English, I don't need to know the Greek. I don't need to know the Hebrew. I don't need to know the textual things lying behind it. As a pastor and somebody who's interested in this stuff, I'm glad to look. I'm tell you what, I'm having a blast learning this stuff. And however, for you, if you have an interest in this and you want to study further, or whatever the case is, great. But at the same time, what I'm teaching you through these different things, I don't think you need to know. It's just good to know. Good to have a basic working knowledge. Just like you don't need to know Greek. You don't need to know Hebrew. Once you get the English mastered, you get the English Bible mastered, hey, let's move on to Greek and Hebrew, and then go from there. So even though we're talking about complex issues and in history and lining a bunch of stuff up, and like I said, you may not be grasping all of it, part of the reason I'm doing that, and I think I maybe didn't mention this well enough last week, is that the point and the goal is to make it a simple issue. Simple. Is the Bible the Word of God or not? I submit unto you that yes, it is. And if it's perfect, then we have to ask ourselves the question, the next one, then what do we do about different versions? Now, I think part of the answer is then we don't. We worry about ourselves. And for me, through this Bible study, I was King James only before. I am now even further into the King James only camp with this Bible study. The history backs up the position. It's an amazing thing. Matter of fact, I knew Chris wasn't going to be in here tonight, or at least I thought he wasn't, because the Leonards were supposed to be here, and then I put enough kids in Patch to where he needed to be over there, and I sent him a text, said, dude, my mind's blown today. And the things that I'm teaching, you're probably going to appreciate more than anything, or anybody. But however, we'll see. So the verses that I have on your sheet today are the same ones I'd have you open your Bible to. So let's just go ahead and look at our sheets. And if you're not happy about opening our Bible to those things, then let me know, complain. Next week, we will try to have it a little bit different. Next week, though, we're going to start talking about Hampton Court. We're going to talk about King James. We're going to talk about the people he assembled to do this, why they were assembled to do this. Matter of fact, we'll cover that briefly today as well. The Geneva Bible almost caught on. But however, it was the footnotes of the Geneva Bible that really shot it down. But neither here nor there. The Geneva Bible, I read some of the text today, was written in a much more like the Bible talks about how the moon became blood, just the wording's different, obviously, on a few things. But anyways. 2 Timothy 3:16 says, all Scripture is given by inspiration of God and is profitable for doctrine, for reproof, for correction, for instruction in righteousness. So now if you pull out these sheets and you look down at the bottom where it says original manuscripts, that is the God-breathed manuscripts. That's the originals. The originals no longer exist. The originals have never been together. The originals have never been in one place. They've never existed at the same time. So for us to say that we believe the Bible, that it was perfect in the originals, is a statement of unbelief of the English Bible we carry to church under our arm today. So you have the original manuscripts. That is inspiration. All Scripture is given by inspiration of God. God breathed and is profitable for doctrine, for reproof, for correction, for instruction in righteousness. Now, when we say that, we're not saying that anything above it is not inspired. We're just saying God breathed as in God spoken. No. But God breathed and it's alive. Yes. And so this thing is inspired. But however, it's not inspired in the same way as the originals. The originals were inspired in that alive, and God breathed, and and perfect. We still have an alive Bible that's inspired, that's inspired by God. And so there's actually a fight out there between some people saying our King James Bible is not inspired. Some say it is, and somebody in the middle ought to be waving their hands and saying we're saying the same thing. And it's just depending on what definition you're using. So there's no reason to fight over it, just being dumb. And so 2 Timothy 3:16, we'll be talking about original manuscripts, if you want to jot that down there. Then Psalm 12, 6 and 7 on your original sheet says this: the words of the Lord are pure words, the silver tried in the furnace of earth, purified 7 times. Now if you want to go up now to your other sheet, you go to Tyndale. Tyndale's number 1, Coverdale number 2, Matthews number 3, Great number 4, Geneva number 5, Bishop's number 6, and the King James number 7. Interesting how that works. Now,
why is Tyndale 1?
Oh, instead of Wycliffe?
Or even the Vulgate, or even the original manuscript.
Okay.
Why aren't they 1?
Because we're counting off the English versions, so that the Latin and the originals wouldn't be that. The Wycliffe, we agree with the position of Wycliffe in that he believed that the Bible ought to be in the hands of everybody, but the Wycliffe is still based on the Latin Vulgate. Does that make sense? Is there a disagreement there?
Well, I'm just wondering, why wouldn't the original manuscripts be the first?
Because they weren't English. We're just talking about English. Purification. I'm sorry, preservation.
Because you're just trying to match it up to the verse 7 times.
Mm-hmm. But 7 times I was also referring to preservation and not inspiration.
Oh, okay.
Wycliffe was Hebrew?
No, Wycliffe was English. Remember, it was Middle English, but it was based on the Latin Vulgate.
It was based
The Latin Vulgate is a Catholic Bible, which then, if you follow the Latin Vulgate up, becomes the Douay Rheims version, which is the English Catholic Bible. Talks about penance and stuff like that. All right, so. But what we're going back to, the words of the Lord are pure words, as silver tried in the furnace of earth, purified 7 times. And again, let me also state this, I'm numbering 7, but that I just think it's cool. I'm not stating that's historically exactly what happened. Maybe it didn't, but it's so. I'm not elevating that to the point of Scripture, by the way. Thou shalt keep them, O Lord, thou shalt preserve them from this generation forever. And so what we're trying to show then with this is the method of preservation in the English. So, we have a perfect Bible, it's the King James, and then you look at this and it shows where it comes from. Matter of fact, let's flip over to that real quick. So we're all looking at the same thing. So you have the original manuscripts, ancient faithful copies, ancient versions. The Masoretic would be the Hebrew, if you want to jot that down there on that third scroll. Masoretic, the earliest we come to is 900. You have to be okay with that. 900 AD. But however, they were very diligent in getting that done. Then we have the Textus Receptus, which would be the Greek, wouldn't be coming out until the 1500s. But it's based on ancient faithful copies, which are based on the original manuscripts. So then what you have off to the right here, the corrupt early copies, and I put Septuagint because that's mostly what we're referring to. There aren't a huge amount of these out there. They make it sound like the market is overwhelmed with these other things that agree, and it just isn't the case. Like we covered last week, the Dead Sea Scrolls, come to find out, 80% of the time back up the ancient faithful copies in the Masoretic and Textus Receptus, not the Septuagint. The Septuagint, what was the number we gave? What was it, like 12%? Does anybody remember? 15? Whatever. It was a pretty small amount, whatever it was. And so it only agreed 15%. And so even they said, and we covered this last week, how the Essenes and the people before the Essenes were less diligent than the people that gave us the Masoretic texts. What's new this week is you see up here on top of the corrupt, and you go up, Westcott and Hort, and then you have the Nestle Land Greek. Westcott and Hort, those are names that maybe you want to know. You can go ahead and read up on them. They were textual critics. Textual critics isn't a bad thing. That it's just what a textual critic does. It doesn't criticize the Bible, but what he's doing is trying to figure out which ones are most likely closer to the originals. And I'm going to read you a paragraph. Matter of fact, I'll read that paragraph now. And so what I found mind-blowing, which is now as I read these paragraphs, everything that we've taught now just flows. It makes sense. So for the Nestle land, and it may be Nestle. I've heard people say Nestle, but it just looks like Nestle. Maybe I'm hungry for chocolate. I don't know. All right, so I'm going to read you 2 paragraphs out of Wikipedia, which is always right? And so for the Nestle land said this: the Greek text as presented is what biblical scholars refer to as the critical text. Again, we're talking about the Nestle Land Greek from 1898. The critical text is an eclectic text compiled by a committee that compares readings from a large number of manuscripts in order to determine which reading is most likely to be closest to the original. They use a number of factors to help determine reasonable readings, such as the date of the witness, and in parentheses, earlier is usually better. That's their basis. Usually, earlier is usually better. And what we have found, remember that other thing, is that the earlier ones that would have been recopied, just didn't survive because of being recopied. So, day of the witness, the geographical distribution of reading, and the likelihood of accidental or intentional corruptions. In the book, a large number of textual variants or differences between manuscripts are noted in the critical apparatus. The extensive footnotes that distinguish the Nestle Testament in Greek from the Greek New Testaments. Most scholars view Unocal text as the most accurate. However, a few authors, such as New Testament scholar Maurice Robinson and linguist Wilbur Pickering, Albert Farstead, and Zane Hodges, claim that the minuscule text, the Byzantine type text, more accurately reflect the autographs or original text than eclectic text like the N828 that relies heavily on manuscripts of the Alexandrian type text. If you caught 2 words out of that, you're doing pretty good. But however, what it says then is it's based on the Alexandrian type text, which is the Septuagint. This view has been criticized by Gordon Fee and Bruce Metzger, among others. So that's the Nestle Aran. Westcott and Hort. This paragraph is much shorter. The 2 editors favored 2 manuscripts, Vaticanus and Sinaiticus. They also, which are the Septuagint. So 2 manuscripts backing up the Westcott and Hort. That's what they're saying. 2 manuscripts. They also believe that the combination of Codex Bezae and the Old Latin and the Old Syriac represents the original form of the New Testament text. New Testament was written in Greek, so why would the Old Syriac then be the one that they follow? Anyways, so then, if you look up here, you see Westcott and Hort, you see the date written on that one, and it says 1881, correct? And so then you look over at the Revised Version, which last week said Revised Standard Version, which was a mistake on my part. The Revised Standard Version didn't come out until 1960s. But the Revised Version in 1881, so I went and looked, Westcott and Hort, who we're not even sure are saved people, but they gave us the Westcott and Hort Greek text. But you say in 1 year they were able to pull that off? Come to find out, Westcott and Hort were on the Revised Version Committee for translation. When I was just like, this whole thing's coming together. And then the American Standard Version, which you see there in 1901, is a reworked version of the Revised Version for America. The Revised Version then is what the is the kind of Bible for England right now, which may also then point out some of the problems. Anyways, I made a complex issue as simple as I can on one sheet.
Can I ask one question on it?
If I can say one more thing.
Yes.
I know there's nuances. I understand that. I'm not claiming to be an expert on this stuff. But as you look at this, I mean, you can see I had to make some things smaller. And when I made them smaller, it threw off their aspect ratio, especially on the Douay. I'm not even sure what that looks like. And but, you know, the Wycliffe is now bent up further and the dates don't go the same. I try to make it as simple as possible. Now, it's based on somebody else's work, but I made some adjustments based on what we found out since that little graphic was made in the 60s, I believe. Yes, Chris?
Just want to make sure. To me, it seems like the line shouldn't be there. But you got Tyndale is based off of Latin Vulgate.
What those things are is just they did reference back to it.
Okay. So it did reference back to the Vulgate.
Yeah, it's referenced. But notice I put the Wycliffe. I didn't make a tube going from one to the other. All those, by the way, on Photoshop are labeled tubes. And so there's no tube between Wycliffe and the Latin Vulgate. It's just based on it.
Yeah.
So Tyndale did look back.
All right.
Coverdale, which we're going to cover today, the New Testament is the Tyndale New Testament with Coverdale and John Rogers finishing out the Old Testament. Matthew's, which was written by John Rogers under a different name. We're going to get to that in a minute. So good stuff in here. Some of them, I trusted what the Thomas Chain graphic had. I don't know, like for instance, for the Geneva going down to the Matthews. Okay, I know a little bit about that.
Are they stacked just because of date?
Yeah,
Or are they stacked so they go off of each other?
both. All of them look back at previous.
Okay.
And even on if you look at your letter to the translators on your King James Bible, it says that older versions were diligently compared or something like that.
And then the tubes are what they mainly go back to?
Yeah, tubes just indicate a lot of influence. Or stacked like Wycliffe on top of Latin Vulgate. You know, that's what it's based off of. But there's also 1,000 years in that gap. All right, let's talk about Miles Coverdale for a little bit. And really, this will just be a minute. Wasn't a very good looking guy, as you can see. William Tyndale, who we covered last week, was had the Tyndale New Testament. William Tyndale, not to be confused with Miles Coverdale. When William Tyndale was burned at the stake in 1536, and as he died, his prayer was, "Lord, open the King of England's eyes." Miles Coverdale was one of his assistants and worked with him quite a bit. Now, come to find out, Miles Coverdale had influence over the Coverdale, the Matthews, and the Great Bible, and matter of fact, even the Geneva. And so, if you're covering Miles Coverdale, now all of a sudden you got to look at the next 4 versions of the Bible and realize he had influence on them. And mostly, I believe that Miles Coverdale was somewhat of an answer to the prayer of William Tyndale. And within 2 years of that prayer, you see there Coverdale 1535. 1525. And so within 10 years, we already have the Coverdale version being brought out, the 1537, the Matthew's Bible. And these are within 3 to 4 years of Tyndale's death, his burning at the stake. Okay, so Miles Coverdale was an assistant to Tyndale. And so let's talk about the Coverdale Bible for a moment. Miles Coverdale was also originally Catholic, influenced by Protestantism early. He was against most of the Catholic system later on. He was in exile a few times. But after William Tyndale was martyred, Miles Coverdale, along with John Rogers, accelerated their work in getting the Tyndale Bible out even more, and then began work on the Coverdale. John Rogers, and again, telling you the stuff you're not even going to remember. John Rogers, used the pen name Thomas Matthew, and we'll get to in a minute why, but that's why it's called the Matthew's Bible, not the Rogers Bible, because John Rogers was one of Tyndale's assistants, and he didn't want his name attached to it, fearing that Henry VIII, who was still the king who killed Tyndale, would then reject the Bible just because his name was on it. So he penned it or translated under a different name. 1535, Miles Coverdale Bible printed. It's the first complete printed English Bible. Remember, the Tyndale was the New Testament only. Then he ended up doing Genesis through Joshua. And then Coverdale was the first to get the first completed printed English Bible. It was basically Tyndale's New Testament and some of the books from the Old Testament. However, Coverdale was not as comfortable with Greek and Hebrew as Tyndale was. Are you following this so far? So he did refer to Latin, but he also referred quite a bit to Luther's German Bible to help him finish the work. Because he would have been familiar with them, because they were now working together because he was exiled to Germany. Going back to Coverdale, and I get it, you guys, you can read those things, I can send you notes, you can go back and look at the history, just jot the stuff down if you want. So he was exiled again after Thomas Cromwell's execution. Thomas Cromwell was a powerful ally of the English Reformation and worked for Henry VIII. And he was a protector of Coverdale. After Henry VIII's death, he moved back and was in favor with the next king, which is King Edward. All right. So if you want to write down on this, you can. After last week, we got these. Henry VIII's first wife was Catherine of Aragon. Their daughter's name is Mary. And then, remember, Henry VIII wanted to divorce Catherine of Aragon, but the Catholics wouldn't allow it. Catherine of Aragon was the daughter of somebody the Pope was trying to keep powerful ties with, and so the Catholics wouldn't allow it. So that's when Henry VIII decided he's the head of the Church of England, and then we started the Anglicans, which now we would call the Episcopalians in America, and so was able then to divorce Catherine of Aragon, but yet Mary was their daughter. He wanted a male heir. So his second wife was Anne Boleyn. We mentioned that last week. Anne Boleyn's daughter was Elizabeth. Again, didn't get a male heir, so divorced her. And the third wife was Jane Seymour. And you're sitting there thinking, man, she's lived a long time, and even makes jewelry for Kay Jewelers now. And had a TV show, Dr. Quinn Medicine Woman. Wrong Jane Seymour. Oh! So Jane Seymour and Henry VIII had a son named Edward. And so then Edward would be made king, and then Elizabeth and Mary were then written out of the royal lineage. But however, if you look at the bottom of your sheet, what names do you see? You see Mary and Elizabeth. That's going to come in later. All right. Well, let's talk about it for a minute. So Bloody Mary, that would be Queen Mary, the first right there. We have Henry VIII, Edward VI, which was friendly to the Protestants, friendly to Coverdale. Queen Mary became the queen, and she was a Catholic, and she wanted Catholic rule returned to England. So she was called Bloody Mary and killed over 300 of the English reformer leaders. However, when Coverdale was in prison, the King of Denmark lobbied for his safe passage to Denmark, and so he was able to make it there. That's going to come in important in a moment. So when Queen Mary died, Coverdale went back again. Elizabeth the first was a Protestant and opposed Catholicism. So Coverdale then returns and dies 2 years later in England in 1568. So the dates you see there at the bottom, then you just correspond those to those later. Again, this is English history. I don't expect you to be able to repeat it after the service is over. But just be able to grasp some of the stuff. How the history works is just cool. All right, so let's move on to the Matthew's Bible. So the Matthew's Bible was the first complete English translation from the original Greek and Hebrew. Remember, the Coverdale referred back to a little bit of the Latin and referred back a little bit to German. Scholars consider the Matthew's Bible to be the first true and legitimate translation. It wasn't done, it was done by a committee. I understand the other one's word. But it combined the work of three men. Tyndale, if you look at Matthew's 1537, Tyndale's been dead for a couple years. Coverdale and John Rogers. So if you want to write the name John Rogers next to the Matthew's Bible, John Rogers was using the pen name Thomas Matthew because, remember, the people who killed Tyndale, if you look at the bottom, are still alive and didn't want his name attached to it. So they put the Matthew name, and so then it went, and then the King Henry VIII accepted the Matthew's Bible as the official Bible of England. We're within 3 or 4 years of Tyndale being burned at the stake and praying that God opened the eyes of the king. And now all of a sudden they change one person's name on the cover. And now all of a sudden the king has authorized the Bible in English, in complete English, to be read everywhere.
What was his pen name again? First name?
Thomas Matthew. John Rogers. Thomas Matthew. Which, interestingly enough, Tyndale used that name on occasion. So this Bible was passed to Cromwell, who we mentioned earlier, who was a protector of the Reformers, then to Henry VIII, and it was approved within 10 days. All right, so now Rogers ends up being martyred for not denying salvation by grace by Queen Mary I. So Queen Mary I, Bloody Mary, ends up killing Rogers, Thomas Matthew. So Matthew's Bible, Queen Mary ends up killing off him. So now let's move to the Great Bible. So Thomas Cromwell, who we've mentioned a couple times, who was an assistant to Henry VIII, said this: we need one book of the Bible of the largest volume in English. When he says that, he's actually talking about size. And the same setup in some convenient place within the said church that ye care of, whereas your parishioners may most commodiously resort to the same and read it. So the Great Bible was part of the reason it's called great is because it was made great. It's a big Bible, and it was chained to the pulpit of every Bible in England, or every pulpit in England. But what it basically is it's a revision of the Matthew's Bible. When we say revision, we're talking about somebody went in and changed. People will tell you the King James Bible has been revised, and it hasn't. There's different editions of the King James Bible, and we're going to cover that. We're okay with that. We're okay with going from the first edition to the second edition. We're okay with getting rid of the Gothic font and going to the Roman type. We're okay to changing F's to F's. But those are additions, not revisions. So, the Matthew's Bible, I'm sorry, what did I just say? The Great Bible is a revision of the Matthews. And so obviously it's still, we're still dealing with Coverdale here. So he still has, which would still put the Great and the Matthews referring back to the Tyndale, hence the pipe. But it's the first Bible authorized. Okay, I told you something wrong. I told you that the Matthew's Bible was the first, but it's not. The first Bible authorized by the government for public use was the Great Bible, not the Matthew's. Sorry about that.
Then how was Coverdale? Oh, Coverdale was first printed, not the first.
Okay, so Tyndale, let's just go backwards about what it was. New Testament only.
Okay.
And the Coverdale was Tyndale's New Testament and most of the Old Testament, but then again, no, the Old Testament there, but it was based, it had a little bit of the Latin Vulgate in it and a little bit of Martin Luther's German Bible. The Matthews is a revision of the Coverdale done by John Rogers. And then the Great Bible was then another revision of the Matthews, but it was large and chained to pulpits. And it was the first one, not the Matthews, to be authorized for public use. And what would happen there is people would gather in churches and pay people to read them the Bible. Kind of an amazing thing. But however, nobody could take one home. And so that's part of the reason it just never caught on. So the Great Bible was called the Chained Bible. It was also called the Cromwell Bible. But since they were going for size, they called it the Great. All right, so number 5, Geneva Bible. So on this date here, I did something wrong. So the reason that the Geneva Bible, and so I knew I would do this where I'd have to pull these back and then reprint them. So the Geneva Bible, Mary I was now the queen. Hundreds of people were killed and trying to move England back to Catholicism. And many leaders then fled to Geneva. You might know the names like John Knox or John Calvin was even one of them. So the Geneva Bible, some of the footnotes certainly had a Calvinist point of view, and so of course we don't want that, and that's it's. But anyways, so that's why it's called the Geneva Bible. It's still in English. So, but however, it was a small Bible, thus it was popular. You could carry it. It would be just like ours. It was also the first to use Roman type, so it was easy to read. And so it really became popular. Matter of fact, it was the first edition with chapters, verses, italics. It had a concordance, it had maps, and it had notes in the margins. And the notes, by the way, causes controversy. And if this Bible didn't have the notes in the margins, it's possible that King James doesn't bring about the Hampton Court, which brings us then the King James Bible. Which, by the way, King James had nothing to do with the translation. He was all about the authorization, and that's why it's probably a little bit more accurate to call our King James Bibles the authorized version, because that's what they were. However, it's the Geneva Bible that stuck around. The King James Bible, come to find out, didn't really start to gain traction for about another 50 years. The Pilgrims, when they came to America, this was the Bible they had. They had the Geneva. But imagine that. Now you have the first one with chapters, verses, and italics. You could actually have somebody in the audience. You could say, everybody turn to Genesis, and not say, well, if you look at about that place where it starts talking about Joseph, if you can find that. And so they weren't doing that. They were, the people didn't carry a Bible in, but now all of a sudden people maybe could have. I mean, it's still expensive. But this was the Bible carried by the Pilgrims to the U.S. So now Queen Mary I, Bloody Mary, dies. And then Queen Elizabeth now becomes the queen. Now, to keep this straight, you look on your sheet, King Henry VIII, his firstborn was Mary, second was Elizabeth, and third was Edward. However, Edward was the boy, so he got to be king, which, by the way, they had queens. It's just that Henry wanted to be a boy. And so kept on divorcing and killing wives until he finally got to one that could produce a male heir. So that brought us King Edward VI, who ended up being a pretty good guy. And then when he died, he tried to pass on the throne to Joan, the woman Joan of something, not Joan of Arc, by the way, but Joan of something, but it got disputed. And so then Mary rose up and got an army behind her, battle, and went and took the throne. And so Mary was then the queen, killed 300 some odd Protestants. Elizabeth then becomes queen, and so then Elizabeth is the one then that brought about the Bishop's Bible. Queen Elizabeth, though friendly to reformers and Protestants, disliked the Geneva's Bible's notes. And so it was the notes of the Geneva Bible that ends up giving people problems. So, the Bishop's Bible is a revision of the Great Bible, but it never caught on with anybody. It's just kind of there. I should have looked up, and I should be able to tell you why they call it the Bishop's Bible, but I didn't. And so sorry about that. And so the date. Okay, but so with all of that, then you see how the history of all this stuff intertwines. And how amazing this stuff is. This is just cool. All right, let's look at a couple pages up here. Going back to the Geneva Bible. When they all went to exile, avoiding Mary I, Bloody Mary, they kind of convened in Geneva. And then that's when they got together and put out a Bible. And so even that Geneva, Coverdale was part of the translation committee for even the Geneva. Now, starting next week, here's what we're going to do. I wanted to show preservation, and I think we have. This thing is not exhaustive. I just try to make it simple. And again, I'm using this as, hey, listen, the Bible's the Word of God. It's perfect.